Welcome to Inside Economics. I'm Mark Sandy, the chief economist of Moody's Analytics, and I'm joined by my two trusty co-hosts, Marisa Di Natale and Chris Dorides. Hi, guys.
Mark,
Mark,
How's everyone doing? I understand, Marisa, you're not feeling so well today.
I hit Disneyland a little hard yesterday.
Uh,
or maybe
really?
Disneyland hit you hard.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, do you just like go to Disneyland or do you
I
go?
went with two children.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay,
Yes,
all right. I
I
thought
will
maybe you
say,
went on your own. I didn't
no,
know.
I mean, I have done that, I
Yeah.
admit, but no, I went with a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old.
Oh, that must have been so fun.
3-year-old's first time.
Oh, that
I
must
think
have
her
been so
mind
fun.
was blown.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, mine was blown. Mine was blown. Yeah.
Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. Do they still
It
have
was
that?
so crowded. It was more crowded yesterday than I've ever seen it in my life. And we didn't actually go on a lot, and she was scared of like everything. She was scared of any ride that was dark and inside. So we went on limited amount of rides. Yeah.
This is the 3-year-old.
This is the 3-year-old. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So no Haunted Mansion.
No, we were getting on and she had to be taken off. She had to be removed from Haunted Mansion.
Wow.
I have to tell you, I am so burned out by theme parks. My wife grew up in Daytona Beach, Florida, and so every chance we get, we'd be in Daytona Beach, and of course, Daytona Beach is an hour and 15 minutes from every theme park on the planet. And
yeah.
I went to so many theme parks for so many years. I even had my favorite lunch place at the Islands of Adventure. It was my favorite chicken nuggets. I'm not kidding. I wonder if it's still there. Now, here's the weird thing. I haven't been in, my kids are older. I haven't been there in 20 years. I can't wait to go again with my grandkids. I want grandkids. Yeah. Give me some grandkids, please.
Yeah.
Yeah. But can't wait to do that.
Well, I'm mentioning that a lot lately.
It was at Disneyland that the Taco Bowl was sort of invented.
No, really? This is Fred Hochberg. He's like an interloper. I don't know, Fred, who invited you to this thing?
I just crashed.
You just crashed. You couldn't resist. Okay. Okay. This goes to your book, right?
Yes, it goes to the book, but I figured.
Yeah, go far away. Yeah.
Well, one of the things my book is called "Trade is Not a Four-Letter Word," because frankly, particularly under President Trump and just generally, trade got a bad rap in this country. And so I wrote a book about it. But one of the things I did discover was the Taco Bowl, which President Trump made famous.
Oh, that's right. I forgot that. Yeah.
During his campaign about the Trump grill. But anyway, it's the Taco Bowl, like many things we eat, was not invented in Mexico. It was actually invented at Disneyland. And so a lot of things that we eat may appear to be foreign, but they're not. Like corned beef and cabbage was actually invented here in America from Irish immigrants who wanted to feel like they were home, and so they came up with corned beef and cabbage. So the Taco Bowl is one, but that's actually at Disneyland. So that's why I butted into the conversation.
Not at all. I knew you couldn't resist. I should have introduced you earlier on. But it's wonderful to have you on Inside Economics, Fred. We keep running into each other. It feels like. I think the last time we were in New York at a New York Economics Club, and
yes,
Lael Brainerd was there, and had a conversation with her. And I think before that we were in San Diego at a policy/political function.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right. And maybe you can give us, we're going to talk about trade. We're going to talk about globalization. We're going to talk about China, obviously, a Biden-Trump policy, but in your book, of course. But maybe before we kind of move in that direction, maybe you can give us a sense of your background, sense of your career.
Well, sure. Well, anyway, it's wonderful to be here and to find another way to see you, Mark, and to meet Marisa and Chris. So I was in business for about 20 years, a company called Lilly and Vernon, which was a direct marketing, a catalog company, founded by my mother, named Lillian. And after the third marriage, she just changed her last name to Vernon and decided enough of these changes and revisions to my name. I'm going to just go with the name of my company. And it's named after the town the business was started in, Mount Vernon, New York. And just as a little personal aside, she started the business on our kitchen table, and I made the comment recently that, men start businesses in their garage because the car is kind of a locus of a boy's life, as you know, in Silicon Valley. And many businesses started by women start on the kitchen table. And just recently, my brother and I donated that table to the Smithsonian Museum of American
Oh,
History.
that is so cool.
So they have it'll be up till 2040. So you have plenty of time to catch it if you haven't seen it yet.
What
But
happens
it's
after
American
that?
Enterprise exhibit.
What happens after 2040? Why
Well,
2040?
the exhibit's up for like 30 years. I
Oh,
think
I see.
they
I
will
see.
probably do a real refresh after 30 years.
I got it.
But it
Got it.
traces American enterprise and how it's shaped our country and how we become such an economic powerhouse. And anyway, I did donate the kitchen table, and it's there right now if anybody sees it. But so I was in business for 20 years. After that, I did a lot of work on LGBT Q civil rights, and then ultimately joined the Clinton administration. I was the deputy, the number 2 at the Small Business Administration, and for a short time, the acting administrator. And then I was a dean at the New School, School of Public Policy.
Mm-hmm.
And then I spent 8 years with President Obama as chair of the Export-Import Bank. And the Export-Import Bank briefly was started by FDR, by Franklin Delano Roosevelt in the 30s, 1934 to be exact, with the realization that if we want to put more people to work, exports are one way to do that. Exports create jobs, and they also bring revenue in. So I was fortunate to be selected to chair the bank. And I did it for 2 terms, for the first and second term. So I'm the longest serving. There were certain days I was the long suffering chair of the Export Bank, but I was the longest serving chair of the Export Bank. And the Export Bank, basically, as I said, we help finance exports when conventional or standard banking isn't available. And we have the best banking system in the world, but its best is not all, doesn't do everything. So, like 2/3 of the loans and guarantees that we made at the Export-Import Bank were to developing countries that have a less sophisticated taxation system, less sophisticated banking system, and therefore often needed external financing and banking in order to import power systems, aircraft, locomotives. Most of our goods were more heavy capital goods, would be the preponderance. Some services, but capital goods is sort of the quote unquote bread and butter of the kind of work the Export-Import Bank does. And just to finish, there are now about 100 Export-Import banks around the world. And even when I was just there over a decade ago, there were maybe 60. So it has grown enormously as country after country has realized we want to get our goods on the world stage. And if we need to help finance it, we'll do so.
Yeah, I'm sure you don't remember, but our first point of contact is when you were at the XM Bank. You reached out.
I remember vividly.
Do you really? Oh, I'm so surprised. Yeah,
and I know that's how we met.
Yeah,
I think that's the reason you answered my phone call.
No. I would have answered your phone call regardless. But I remember that conversation, very well. And what 8 years? That's a long tenure, right? Would you say that's the longest?
I'm the long, yes, because it's a term job, so I had to be confirmed actually twice by the Senate for the job for the first 4 years, and then confirmed again for another 4 years, and that is the longest serving.
Right. Well, there's a lot to unpack there, and we're going to definitely come back. But since we have Marisa, and I'm not sure how long we have her, and the big economic news of the week was the consumer price report. And I'm not going to tell anyone how I feel about that, but I'm pretty sure you know how I feel about that report. Anyway, Marisa, maybe you can give us a sense of the numbers and what you think they mean.
Sure. I'm sure you feel wonderful about this report. First of all, let me say at the top,
slam dunk. Wonderful.
I think we know exactly how you feel. It was a very good report. So this was the consumer price index for October. Prices overall were flat over the month. By that, I mean, they were unchanged between September and October. This was even better than ours and consensus forecast, which was expecting a slight increase. And just as a reminder, in August and September, prices were up 0.6%, 0.4%. So this is a marked deceleration from previous months. Over the year, total prices are up 3.2%. That's down from 3.7% in September. And as a reminder, we peaked at like 9% back in June of 2022. So we're down by 2/3 basically. Energy prices drove the decline over the month for sure. So the CPI for energy fell 2.5% over the month. It had risen 1.5% in September and was up 5.6% in August. Gas prices were down 5%. All energy commodities were down just about 5% as well. Domestic oil production has been responding to higher prices, and that's helped to bring prices down. Let's see, food prices, sticking with top line CPI, food prices rose 0.3% over the month. They are up 3.3% over the year. They had peaked around 11% year over year in August of 2022. Food prices at home were up 0.3%. That's actually an acceleration from the previous month. And food away from home rose 0.4% over the month, which was the same that they did in September.
Actually, the food, scouring the report, the only part of the report that might have been a little bit of a blemish would have been food prices. But other than that, felt like everything else was moving in the right direction, meaning less inflation.
Yeah, the only other major category I saw that was an acceleration over the month was auto insurance.
Oh, yeah, vehicle insurance.
Yeah.
Right. But you saw the new vehicle prices did fall.
Right. Both new and used vehicle prices fell over the month. That's right. Core CPI, let's talk about core, rose 0.2% over the month. And that is a deceleration from the prior month when core rose 0.3%. Core is up 4% year over year, right? So we're talking 3.2% on total inflation year over year. Core is up 4%. This, again, just to put it into some context, core was up 6.6%, which was sort of the post-pandemic peak in September of 2022. Goods prices within core are basically not contributing to core. It's really all coming from core services, the inflation in core. Shelter, which we have been keeping an eye on, we know that shelter prices are about 40% of core inflation. And they were up 0.3% month over month. That follows a 0.6% increase in September. Prices for owner's equivalent rent, which we've had some discussion about in the past few podcasts, that was up 0.4%, down, deceleration from 0.6% increase in September. And then rents, the CPI for rents rose 0.5%. And that was the same as they had risen in the prior month. So we're looking at 7.2% was the peak of year over year rents in September. We're down to 6.7% year over year as of October. So still very high inflation coming from shelter, but it appears to be moving in the right direction at least.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but if I take the CPI, the total index, and I exclude the shelter piece, we're back to target. We're back to 2%-ish on inflation.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
that's if you take out food, energy, and shelter, right?
No. Oh, no. Just take the CPI.
Just shelter as well?
Just take the CPI. And of course, the energy price declines are helping here, get CPI down. But the CPI X shelter, I think, is 2%.
It's 1.5.
Okay. Well, okay.
Even better.
Even better.
Yeah.
No, yeah.
Now I have to find another statistic, by the way. But
sorry. Okay, so Marisa, what's your sense of it? I mean, take a step back and what do you think?
I mean, obviously, you know, if we're talking about headline CPI, energy is moving this thing all over the place from month to month since August, right? So we had this big run up as energy prices rose, and now we're on the backside of that with energy prices falling and detracting. But you strip away that, you look at core, it's coming down. And I mean, shelter is going to be stubborn to move, just given the way the BLS measures shelter inflation, we know. But everything looks like it is moving in the right direction. It just, you know, the core services inflation and shelter are just going to take a bit longer to move down. And as we've said before, it may not be a linear movement, right? Like we might have some months where things pop up a little bit and then come down, but it's a really good report all around.
Okay.
I think it's
That's
hard
right,
to
where
find
you
something
want.
bad in it.
That's what I wanted you to start that way. It's a really good report.
I did start that. I started by saying that you thought it was a really good report.
Yes, right. Okay, Chris, you're the.
It's a solid report, unless
Okay.
you care about tobacco prices, which
Oh,
did
really?
shoot up. But yeah,
I didn't follow that. Are they up a lot?
I didn't think you would.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Is cannabis in the CPI report anywhere?
Is it in the basket?
I don't know. It should
think
be,
so.
shouldn't it? It's not in the basket. Oh, well, that's an interesting. Interesting
Probably
question.
not.
Probably
I would
not.
not.
Okay.
Well,
All right.
it's still illegal federally, so
federally.
probably
Oh,
not.
that's right. It's illegal federally.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. All right. Hey, Fred, maybe I'll bring you in here. Marisa mentioned goods prices, and they correct me if I'm wrong, Marisa, they're now falling pretty consistently, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's almost no contribution coming from goods really
Right.
to
Right.
overall inflation. It's really all services.
Yeah, and I think this kind of goes to one of your themes, right, Fred, about trade and prices. I mean, because of globalization and the benefits of globalization, it brought down costs and translated into lower inflation. And here we are again. You know, of course, there was the pandemic and that messed things up. But on the other side of the pandemic, it feels like we are still seeing the benefits of globalization in terms of prices on goods.
Right. I mean, you know, the fact is, between automation, which is also a big factor, and the fact that, and since we talked a little bit about vehicles, you know, we don't really have lemons anymore, you know, and even generally in products, you know, if closer to 100% of products produced are not flawed, you know, every even dropping that by 1/10 of a point makes a difference in cost, because of if a product has to get recalled or is malfunctioning, that actually adds to cost. So between quality, automation, and globalization, you know, I mean, we're going to talk a little later about China, but China's been a big driver in keeping our inflation at bay for the last 20 years, and has been a source of low cost of goods and also a lot of substitution. So that imports have really helped us for many, many years, sort of keep inflation at bay. And, you know, the amount that individuals, homeowners, spend on sort of food and shelter, which Marisa was just talking about, has been steadily declining. And then a lot of it has to do with imports and the fact that there is some globalization. Certainly with food, fruits, vegetables coming from Mexico. And, you know, just recently it turned out that our largest trading partner today is Mexico, not China, which is also a big shift. And part of that is also agriculture.
Yeah, I mean, as I recall, before the relationship with China kind of went off the rails, went sideways under the Trump administration, and then of course we had the pandemic. If you go back into the 2000s and the 2010s, we estimated that trade with primarily China, but globalization more generally, reduced overall CPI inflation by about 1/4 point per annum. So, you know, that would be, instead of growing 2.25% per annum, it would grow 2% because of the weight on goods prices caused by or as a result of the globalization that was occurring. So very powerful. I think and I'm going to state this, but maybe ask if this resonates. it feels like the goods price weakness we're seeing now is less related to globalization. In fact, we might be going a bit backwards here on globalization. We'll talk about that. This is more about the strong value of the dollar. The dollar
Right.
is very strong, and that's translating through. Yeah, you agree with that? Okay.
I agree with that.
Yeah. So Chris, anything else you wanted to add on the CPI report? Any blemishes that Marisa mentioned motor vehicle insurance. I mentioned maybe a blemish on food, which probably temporary, but anything else in there you saw that caused you any concern whatsoever?
Not really. I mean,
No.
the shelter, the rents, obviously we'd like to see those come in a bit more quickly, but we know that's a process. But other than that, no, it was, like I said, I think a very solid report. Market reaction interpreted as a solid report, moving in the right direction. So,
yeah, I think I've said this before. I mean, we forecast lots of things. Some things we forecast we're confident in, some not so much. The forecast that inflation is going to come back to the Fed's target in a reasonably timely way, let's say by this time next year, I feel very confident in that. I mean, if inflation X shelter is already there, and all we need to do is get inflation back down to something that's more typical, it feels like that's what's going to happen because market rents are down, and that's what drives the measured inflation for housing.
right.
Okay, you would agree with that then?
Yep.
Okay, all right, good. And can I say before we move on, all the things we were nervous about with regard to the economy coming into the fourth quarter feel a lot less ominous all of a sudden to me. UAW strikes over, no government shutdown. The student loan repayment doesn't feel like it's even been a blip. Oil prices are back down to $75 a barrel. $75 a barrel,
Or even less, right?
Well, I took the average of WTI and Brent, 75.
Oh, yeah.
That's what, yeah, right. And the 10-year Treasury yield, it's still a little elevated, but 4.45. It feels like all those headwinds we were worried about, they kind of just dissipated, right? So feels really good. And that's the stock market, right? And that's all the grain. Anyway, okay, let's move on. Let's play the game. In the statistics game, we each put forward a statistic. The rest of the group tries to figure that out through questions and clues, deductive reasoning. The best statistic is one that Marisa never gets. No, just kidding. One that is not so easy. We all get it quickly, not so hard that we never get it. And if it's apropos to the topic at hand, bonus. And Fred said he's going to play, but I'm going to go to Marisa first because that's tradition. So Marisa, what's your statistic?
My statistic is 13,000.
13,000. Statistic that came out this week.
Yeah.
Government statistic.
Yes.
Related to inflation in any way?
Not directly.
Not directly.
Related to trade?
No.
No.
Is it a price?
No.
Is it a number of people?
It is.
Oh, geez. What the heck is that?
Number of people that were at Disneyland yesterday.
Right. On that
I think
ride.
it was more than 13,000. well more.
Talking about inflation, how much is a ticket to Disneyland these days?
It's really out of control. And it's not just the ticket. I mean, it's like probably $200 a person, and that includes for, a 3-year-old. Then you pay $35 for parking.
Mm-hmm.
Then you buy all the food and all the things, right?
Yeah.
And it's
the Mickey
astronomical.
Mouse hat. Yeah, it's crazy. Okay, back to the number 13,000. Is this like we're never going to get one of this number? Or
No.
Are we going to be embarrassed if we don't get it?
So I'm taking a transformation of something because I think if I gave you kind of the headline, you'd get it right away.
Oh,
is it UI claims?
Yes, it is.
The increase in UI claims.
Yeah, it's the increase in UI claims.
Fred, I'm just saying, Fred,
Nicely
you see
done.
how that's done? You see
Nicely
how that's done? That's got to be impressive, right? No?
That's an impressive number.
Okay, there.
Very impressive.
The number was impressive.
Oh, that's funny. I feels like weak tea to me, Marissa. I don't know. Go ahead.
Well,
Tell me why.
I picked it because that they popped up pretty
They popped up,
significantly
yes,
than we've
okay.
seen in the past few
Yeah.
months, right? I
Yeah.
mean, this is like, it's not a crazy number. So UI claims last week were came in at 231,000,
Mm-hmm.
but that's significantly above. They've been moving higher since the like mid beginning of October, when they had fallen to about 200,000. So they're still low. There's still not really any reason to worry, but they do appear to be moving up a bit. So it's something to keep an eye on. It's something I keep an eye on very closely to see if we're seeing any real signs of major weakening in the labor market. So far, we've seen, job openings come down, hiring come down, job growth weaken, right? But we really haven't seen layoffs pick up to any significant degree. So this is just something to watch. We think if we get to around about 270,000 a week, that would be time to worry. That would probably be the point at which you would see the unemployment rate rising due to layoffs.
Yeah, I think we've just talked about it in the past, but just to state it again, I mean, UI claims are a really good barometer, weekly data, very good barometer of kind of the state of the labor market. But you got to be really careful week to week, or even over a period of time, particularly post pandemic, because of seasonal adjustment issues. It's hard to. The pandemic really messed up the seasonal patterns in claims, and there is a great deal of seasonality in what's going on in the labor market. So you got to be really, really careful. So I don't get overly exercised if it's below 200K or if it's closer to 250. Really, we have to see a definitive breakout here to north of 250, 275, something like that.
Yeah, and the 4-week moving average, if you smooth it out with a 4-week moving average, it's at 220.
220. Okay.
Yeah.
Still very low. Okay. Hey, Fred, you saw how it was done. You want to go next?
Yes, I can go next. Does it have to be a statistic of this week or one-on-one?
No. You can fire away.
Okay. My statistic in the spirit of Marissa is 995 billion.
Is that the increase? Well, that sounds like
Is that how much Disneyland made yesterday?
On you.
That has to do something with the trade deficit, right?
No.
No. Okay.
No.
Okay. Not the trade deficit.
Is it dollars or?
Yeah.
It's a billion, $995 billion. That's close to $1 trillion,
That's a
right?
lot of
Very close to very, very close to $1 trillion.
And it's not anything to do with trade. It's got to do with
it has
trade.
to do with trade. Yes.
Oh,
okay. It's just not the deficit.
It's not the deficit. Is it trade with one country? Is it trade with China? No. Is it? No, it can't be. Is that? Maybe it is. Exports plus imports, maybe.
Or I'll give a clue. It's exports from one country.
Oh, it has to be China, right? No, it's U.S. U.S. exports or not? No.
Nope.
U.S. This is
total exports, global exports from one country.
Right.
Germany?
Mexico?
No.
It's not China. It's not the U.S. It's one country, not Germany. It sounds like a lot of exports.
Yeah. That's why
Saudi Arabia.
No, Saudi Arabia is about half of that.
Oh, Saudi's half of that, 500 billion. Oh, this has got to be good. It's going to be something like Singapore or something, Hong Kong or something like that. No,
it's the Netherlands.
The Netherlands.
Which shocked me because we do our exports at 2.1 trillion, so they're almost half, and they're a lot smaller than we are.
Yeah, I guess that's Rotterdam and
okay. So it's trade coming through.
Yeah,
it's in and out.
Right? Yeah, that number because Germany's 1.7 trillion, and I think tiny Netherlands is 60% of what Germany exports. So
that's right. Right.
Needs a little more digging, but it was like a number that just like popped out of nowhere for a country that's very, very, very small.
Yeah. I think it must have to do with the port of Rotterdam and just all the goods from Europe travel through, and somehow it gets determined as it's in the Netherlands. That's a great
one of
statistic.
the problems with trade data in general is that if you don't dig down on how we keep score, it can be very misleading.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That was a good one. Chris, you're up.
All right. So I had to switch up here. So this is a fun one.
Okay.
$61.17.
Aren't they all fun?
They are all fun. Absolutely.
$61 and what?
17 cents.
The price of chicken McNuggets, Coke, and fries at Disney World.
Nope.
No? Okay.
It is the price.
It is a price of something.
Something.
Is it a product? A good?
It is a set of products.
A set of products. Is it food related?
It is definitely food related.
Okay. Is it something to do with Thanksgiving?
Oh.
Yes, indeed.
It's the cost of a Thanksgiving dinner.
It is.
Ding, 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 ding. We haven't done that in a while.
That was fast.
Yep.
Wow.
Traditional holiday meal for 10.
That sounds too cheap to me.
Say that again, Chris.
So-
Did you say a meal for 10?
Yes. According to the American
Really?
Farm Bureau Federation, they've been calculating this for decades, I think. That's, yeah. They have a basket of the turkey and all the sides, right? So
Yeah.
they calculate it's and that is down 5%
Oh, really?
from last year, right? So that's significant news. Price of turkey is down significantly because of the avian flu that we had last year.
Mhm.
And then here's my link to trade. Cranberry sauce is down 18%. And most of our cranberries come from Canada. So there you go.
Oh, okay.
You know, just
Strong
full
dollar.
of facts here.
Is that the strong dollar against the Canadian dollar?
Possibly they also had record harvest, right?
They did. Oh, okay.
Or
Thank
strong
Canada
harvest. I don't know if it was a
Making
record.
better Thanksgiving.
Yeah. Thank you, Canada. Thank you,
There you
Canada.
go. There you go.
I
The
just
funny thing about food prices, when they go down, all people think is, I'm a smart shopper. I did a
Yes,
great
right.
job.
That's right.
I outfoxed everybody.
That's
That's
as,
right.
As though trade and the fact there are more turkeys has nothing to do with it.
That's right. That's
That's
I'm
right.
really smart.
I'm a good shopper. Look at this. Yeah.
So maybe we'll get a boost in consumer confidence.
Yeah, there. That's a good one. What? But can I ask? You probably don't. What was the increase last year in the cost of a Thanksgiving dinner?
Oh,
I mean,
it was significant.
because this goes to what's going on out there. I mean, inflation is moderating, but everyone's focused on what they're paying today compared to 2 or 3 years ago, and
Yeah.
they're still pretty upset. And I'm
Exactly.
guessing
If it goes up, if it's going up, a modest even 2%, but it still feels up. It's up 10% from what
Yeah.
you remember.
right.
It feels high.
Yeah, and I think that's President Biden's problem. Big problem.
Yeah, I don't have that specific. I do have this statistic that it costs 25% more still than it did in 2019.
Okay, there you go.
So,
Do you remember last year having this conversation around Thanksgiving? I
No.
remember us having this conversation on the podcast because
Yes.
I bought a turkey for $90.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
That's right.
Yeah. Fred, she's not a good shopper. She
No,
definitely got
actually,
ripped off.
I returned it.
You returned it.
You returned it.
I did. Yeah.
Well, I thought you would put it up on eBay or something. You probably get it on $110.
I remember how insane turkey prices were last year.
Yeah.
And I remember that everybody was up in arms with it and it was getting so much press. And exactly, people were making it political, not realizing there was this avian flu reducing the bird population, right? And that's why turkey prices were up so much last year. But I remember we had this conversation around the same time.
That's interesting. Okay, one more statistic very quickly. It's actually, I'll give you three numbers. They're all related. And I hope it's not too hard. Usually when I think it's hard, it's easy. 150, 1.24, 1.08. I'll give you one more, 0.73. And no one chat GPT this. Yeah. No chat GPT.
It wouldn't know
150.
anyway.
Yeah.
Are these-
It's related to the topic at hand, trade. We've been talking about it.
The first number was 150.
Yeah. to be even more precise, as of today, 149.5. That's a big hint.
Okay.
That's a big. You're going,
So
what
it's a
hint is?
price.
On exchange rate.
Yeah, it's exchange
Oh.
rates. Yeah, very good. Yeah, the yen dollar 150, the pound dollar 124, the euro dollar 108. I think the U.S. Canadian is 73 cents, 73 cents. So the dollar is about as strong as it's been in, ever. There are times when it has been stronger, but rarely. It's really, really strong. Obviously, going to monetary policy here compared to the rest of the world. I mean, the U.S. economy has kind of led the way in terms of growth, and the Fed's led the way in terms of increasing interest rates and higher for longer, and thus the strong dollar. But it's helping us in terms of inflation for sure. Yes, those good prices.
So, Mark, can I push back a little bit? Should we
Yeah,
be
yeah,
the
far
dollar
away.
being strong or weak? Because no one can be for something weak as opposed to the dollar's high or low. Because when you
Okay,
say
fair
strong,
enough.
you're adding a value judgment to
Yeah,
where it is.
that's reasonable pushback. I should say it's high. It's high relative to other currencies. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, absolutely. Good point. All right, let's Fred, let's turn back to your book, and I noticed I think it was published in January of 2020. Good timing, I'd say.
Well, actually the day before the impeachment trial, so that
Oh, even better.
It was not the easiest week to get television coverage.
But I have to say, I was really impressed by the notes of praise you got. Jamie Dimon, Fred Smith of FedEx.
Right.
You had Daniel Rubenstein of
David Rubenstein, Christine Lagarde.
oh, I didn't see that. Christine Lagarde. That's wonderful. Yeah. You must have been very happy to get those kinds of words of
and
praise.
Navarro as well. I got, so it was great.
Yeah, great. And
Yes,
you wanted,
I was very fortunate.
uh, and it's great. I haven't gotten through all of it, but I've gotten through a big chunk of it, and I love the history. There's so much history there that I go, oh, I didn't know that. And I find that history provides a great deal of context. So you kind of walk through your thinking around trade through the prism of 6 different products and services,
Right.
and you mentioned the taco as one of them, but maybe it would be interesting, of all those 6, which one was your favorite one to
Oh
do?
my God,
Or are
that's
they
really
is that like
hard.
asking which is my favorite kid?
Which, by the way, people do have favorite kids. I do know that. They
Oh,
say
it's
so,
okay.
they
Is that
do.
right? uh,
You know, it for different reasons. I mean, I looked at the iPhone, for example,
yeah.
because as just because it illustrated so much. You know, the iPhone, it takes 43 countries to sort of produce the iPhone,
Hmm.
which so it's sort of a perfect example of why trade actually adds value to all of our lives. Without trade, I don't know that you could have created the iPhone, frankly. You could not produce it all in the United States. So it's 43 different countries, almost 750 suppliers. So, I mean, it is massive, and I used to often would tell people, if you like to count your steps, well, you can thank the Netherlands because they make the thing that it goes in the iPhone that counts your steps. And if you can turn it either upright or landscape, you should thank the Swiss because they make the gyroscope that does that. So all these different things go into the iPhone. And the other thing, we were talking about, I threw out the idea of Netherlands having such a high trade number. Only less than $10 of the iPhone actually comes from China. And yet it's an import from China because that's the last stop. And that's where everything is put together. So we import about 16 to 18 billion dollars worth of iPhones a year from China. And that goes into the quote unquote trade deficit with China. But only $10 out of the 300 or so dollars per iPhone is Chinese. But yet they get tagged with all of it. So it's one of those things where it's one of the reasons I think looking at the trade deficit is really not the most. It's like, in politics, people look at how much money did you raise in the quarter.
Mm-hmm.
It's a data point, it's not, doesn't tell all, and it has a lot of misleading characteristics to it. So I
Has
like the
anyone,
iPhone. I like the iPhone partly because it would not exist otherwise. The other thing I also think it was interesting was cars, we still export a lot of cars, but the top 10 cars is in the United States in terms of content. Now 6 of them are actually what we would call American cars, and Tesla has 4 of those slots. But when I wrote the book, the Honda Odyssey was the #1 car with U.S. content, and I actually went to the Honda Odyssey plant in Alabama to actually see how they put it together. But that for a long time had more U.S. content than anything. And the Ford 150 pickup truck was last I looked was about 50%. So part of it just turns around your ideas. What's American, what's not American, what's the value of an import. And my favorite was, which they also just thankfully discontinued, the Chevrolet Spark, which comes from Korea, was 1% American. But people say, oh, buying a Chevrolet, it must be an American car. It feels better than, I want to buy American, I'll buy a Chevy Spark. Well, actually, you'd be better off buying almost any Honda or Toyota or Kia than the Chevy Spark, for example. So those are some of my sort of favorites I pulled out. The other thing, you got me started, Mark.
no, go far away.
We always think about goods, whether the iPhone, a car, services, or we are blessed. Fareed Zakaria once said that if you looked at an economy that's 70% services versus 70% manufacturing, you'd say, I want to be in the service economy. And that's our economy. But we don't think about entertainment, higher education as really important exports. When foreign students come to America and they study here, they leave with an education. That's a service export. And we could handle probably another 1 million foreign students coming to our country, which would both benefit a lot of private universities and public ones, and would also spread American thinking and American values to the rest of the world in a pronounced way. Because if your parents send you to school for just college for 4 years, that's a big investment. That's a big vote of confidence in America. And I don't think we take enough advantage of that.
So you wrote the book because there was growing angst around trade and what it meant for Americans. And, obviously President Trump ran on from a very different prism and perspective. That's the 4-letter word, kind of came from. But there's some truth to it too, right? In the sense that, China's entry in, and we pick on China because it's so massive and it came out of nowhere. I mean, after it entered into the World Trade Organization in 2001, it just came on the scene incredibly quickly. And it did, I think the evidence does show, and I'm curious if you disagree or not, but the evidence does show that trade, the imports from China, did hollow out big parts of U.S. manufacturing and did knock the wind out of many communities across the country that depended on that manufacturing. And one could argue, and here's a little bit more of a stretch, but I'm just going to state it and get your opinion, that it may also have contributed kind of to the social, political issues we're suffering right now. People felt that lost their jobs as a result of trade, and to some degree immigration, that they became disenfranchised and thus rightly upset, and said, hey, I don't know what's the right way forward, but I don't like the way we're on, so I'm going to vote for the person who's taken me in a different direction, whether that's good or bad. Right. Does that all resonate with you?
Without question. I mean, the benefits of trade are spread far and wide, including Marisa going shopping and saving money on her groceries. The pain or the deficits of trade are often felt very narrowly. As you said, when a factory closes, not just the economic hardship, but the social upheaval, the fact that a town all of a sudden, or a city, begins to not have the job generated that paid taxes, that paid for schooling, fire, police, and so forth. And as you said, Mark, where did this really be felt in places like Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Ohio. And what do those states all have in common come 2024? They're all battleground states. So that's one of the reasons that I think trade has been such a political issue, because the places that really got hurt happen to be battleground states.
Right.
Just to make another analogy, I'm here in Miami Beach today. The Cuban population has been highly concentrated in southern Florida, and it's made Florida a battleground state, which is, I would use this word, has kept our Cuba policy somewhat hostage, because no candidate wants to offend. If Florida goes 1 or 2 points in either direction, Trump won by 3, which was a landslide in Florida thinking, because normally the state's gone back
So
and forth.
close, yeah.
So close. And our Cuba policy has been, if the Cuban population was more spread throughout the country, that would probably have a different impact on our politics. And same with trade. I think that trade has been such a part of presidential politics because it's concentrated in a number of states that really got hurt. A little bit, somewhat with NAFTA, and certainly with China.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that now both political parties, Democrats and Republicans, have a very jaundiced view of trade. And, of course, China is the poster child for that angst. And it does feel like there's been a sea change in policy, and it's having real implications. We've gone from globalization, increasing trade, increasing immigration, increasing capital flows, increasing foreign direct investment, all the way the global economy links itself together in the 2000s and the 2010s to we have a debate about what the right word is, but pick your word. De-risk, I heard the president say yesterday when he was talking to the folks in San Francisco. Deglobalization, so forth and so on. And you can see it in the trade statistics. So if I go and I add up U.S. exports, imports, divide by GDP, that went from 10% of GDP kind of after World War II in the 60s and 70s. Then it really took off and it rose to about 25% by the financial crisis. And, since then it's been basically sideways at best. And more recently started to come down. And actually trading patterns with China have shifted. China, we're trading less with China. And as you pointed out, we're now trading more with Mexico and Canada and Southeast Asia and so forth and so on. So it feels like this train has kind of left the station. We're going down the path of deglobalization. Is that fair? And
I think that is fair. I think that is fair. I remember over a decade ago, we were talking, I was with at that time Secretary Geithner, Tim Geithner, and I said, I don't know why the Chinese don't just buy us off. If they just spent another $100 billion on US, they could buy Boeing airplanes and soybeans and hogs and become a great customer and take the pressure off the trade deficit, which I don't think is that important, but take the pressure off. And I think it would have eased a lot of relations the way Japan did. But China in their own way didn't like some of our policies, and therefore wouldn't, I think their politics got in the way of finding ways to smooth things with the United States. And they did nothing to fix that. So, they very much have a lone warrior kind of view of things, and it should not shock us where we are right now with China. But on the other hand, in a positive way, I would say, if you look at U.S. China relations versus U.S. Soviet Union, before the breakup of the Soviet Union, the advantage we have with China is we actually are more intertwined and have a lot more trade, and that has forced both sides to find some common ground from time to time. And frankly, I think the rest of the world is uncomfortable choosing between China and the U.S. on a number of things, certainly in places like Africa. And that may force us to find a path, because they're not going to want to have to continually choose. And so that's my optimism that might be a path towards less of a collision course and more competitive certainly competitive and somewhat cooperative at times.
Oh, so just so I understand, what you're saying is because Europe, because Africa, Southeast Asia, other parts of the world, they really don't want to get in the middle of this U.S. China thing. They don't want to pick sides because that doesn't make sense from their own economic perspective. And by so doing, that will put pressure on China and the U.S. to maybe
Play nice.
come to terms may not be the right way to say it, but,
No, but
at least
play nice.
play nice with each other. Don't hit each other over the head.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because if you hit each other, you can't expect everybody else to fall in line.
Yeah. Yeah. It feels like that might, in what you're saying, that does feel like it's kind of sort of what's happening here to some degree, right? Europeans are saying, hey guys, really, can't you just figure something out here? Yeah. Yeah.
And Europe is much more tied into they export a lot more to China than we do. So that's a trickier issue for them, certainly for Germany.
Right. The thing that makes it a little bit more complicated with China, though, from a U.S. perspective, and perhaps for the rest of the world too, is it doesn't feel like they play fair. I mean, and maybe that's just my American bias.
No, they don't play fair, and
They
they
don't
are a
play
bad
fair.
actor. You
Yeah.
know, the fact that, the thing that President Biden, two of the deliverables or outcomes from that meeting with Xi was about fentanyl, finding a way to sort of reduce that and make sure we have some military communications so we don't have a near miss or an accident that causes a problem. That China broke that off, that didn't have to happen. And on fentanyl, I don't know what the reasons are, but whether China could have cracked down before. Maybe they like the fact that, see, the United States, they can tell their population. The U.S. can't even control their own population. They're all drug addicted and shopping addicted. And so they may have, in a certain way, looked the other way deliberately. But my point is, they could have done more to stop it. And they also, when we look at trade, one of the things, Mark, is we're just coming out of the pandemic. Were it not for trade, companies like Pfizer would have had a much harder time. It was a German-U.S. collaboration that created that spectacular vaccine. China, not wanting that, went their own way with a far inferior product and with real detrimental health and higher death rates because they did not have that. So there are ways we got, it's not so simple.
Yeah. Oh no. Yeah. And in the case of China, the fact that their vaccine didn't work was one reason why they shut down for much longer and why their economy came to the precipice, I think. And they just,
right. As someone said, they went from a zero COVID to zero policy.
Yeah. Like overnight.
Overnight.
They saw the social unrest developing and they go, oh, okay, you can't, this can't stand. So just to be a bit forward looking here, again, the history is rapid globalization in the 2010s, a kind of financial crisis, and then President Trump and now President Biden's kind of following similar policies. Globalization has gone sideways at best. What does the future hold here? I mean, is it continued sideways, or are we going to be able to kick in again and enjoy the benefits of globalization, or what's the future hold here, do you think?
I think the challenge, I think you comment on it, Mark, is, politically, if you look at Congress, for years, when Democrats wanted to get a trade bill passed, they relied on Republicans. And when we look at the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, it lost votes for, there were no votes on either side of the aisle, both Republicans and Democrats. So I think trade deals are really very hard going forward. And I think that's why one of the reasons the Biden administration and Secretary Raimondo and others have worked on, we don't have good acronyms in the government. IPEF, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework.
Right.
Clearly, we don't have marketing people working on these code names. But anyway,
yeah.
So that's why I try not to use too many acronyms. Actually, in my book, I have about 20 pages of explaining what these acronyms mean.
I saw that. Yeah.
Complicated. So I think the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework is a response to saying, all right, we're not going to pass a trade deal, but we have to find a way to work better on on logistics, on supply chains, on harmonizing those things. And that's still running into some difficulties right now, certainly on digital trade and the trade pillar of that. But that's I think that makes good sense. I think it's the best we can do right now. And if people don't think it's good enough, then we're going to have to re-examine where we stand on trade. But I don't think we're ready to do that as a
So
country.
my read on what you're saying is you're optimistic that we don't necessarily need to go down a darker path here, that the kind of tensions between the U.S. and China don't need to unravel into something more serious. And there's good reasons to think that would be the case. But you're also saying pretty difficult, at least in the foreseeable future, to see any kind of trade deal or other effort to kickstart globalization again. We're kind of on a deglobalization, de-risking path here, at least for the foreseeable future.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
listen, we trade with a lot of countries without a
Yeah.
trade deal. You
Yeah.
know, you don't need to have a trade pact, a trade agreement in order to trade. We've been trading with Vietnam for years without a free trade agreement. That's not required. It adds some certainty. It reduces trade barriers and tariffs, and it makes trade easier and more harmonizing. But you can trade regardless. And I think one thing that really separates us from China is, China has this China 2025
Yeah.
policy.
Mhm.
They really don't want to, they would like to be almost an autarky, not importing anything if they could. And the COVID vaccine is a good example. We
Mhm.
thankfully we are still the most open country in the world. And foreign goods, whether it's cranberries, back to Chris, or avocados, which I put in the book and so forth, come into our country, and we live a better life as a result. We have more choices, lower prices. And I think we're now in a period, and it came with the Inflation Reduction Act, of also balancing jobs and imports. And
Mhm.
when it came to electric vehicles, there was a real tax preference if the electric vehicles were manufactured here with American
Mhm.
components. So there are some trade-offs, and partly what I was hoping my book would do is let people, they're always a trade-off. We
Mhm.
can say, yes, we want those jobs. That may mean we have fewer electric vehicles immediately, but we've made that choice.
There's a lot of different things I want to go ask you about, but we are running short on time, and I do want to turn the conversation back to Chris and Marisa. Chris, maybe is there anything you want to explore while we have Fred?
Maybe maybe one thing. I think early on in your comments, Fred, you mentioned it's not just deglobalization that's going on. We also have a period of potentially enormous technological change, and I'm curious if you think those two trends are linked, right? So one theory could be, well, if we were going down the path of technological innovation, more 3D printing, right? Maybe globalization was already going to be pulling back, independent of the politics here. We're going to just manufacture more things in the U.S. or locally because technology enables it. Do you see that as a factor in all of this, or how is that a factor?
Absolutely. I'll give you since you guys like statistics, when I joined the Export-Import Bank, we used to calculate how many jobs were generated by $1 billion worth of exports. And it was like 7,400 jobs when I started. By the time I left 8 years later, it was in the 5,000s.
Huh.
And just to put your point, I think with technological changes, and that labor is a smaller and smaller portion of manufactured goods, there's less of a reason that companies would be looking for a low-cost labor environment. I'm not saying none, I'm just saying
Right.
less, as you pointed, and 3D printing and so forth. So all those things contribute to it. The other thing that's also contributes in the automation and technological is greater customization. The people are talking of a point in time where you could customize your own sneaker with colors and so forth. Well, there's a real advantage of doing that right here because people want to order it, and you're probably going to locate next to a UPS or a FedEx hub so that you can deliver within days. So those kind of trends will certainly be more onshoring and nearshoring as a result. And that plus I think China's under President Xi is seen as too unstable, both unstable internally because of Xi is such a strong-handed and strong man, and B, U.S. China relations are so fraught that I think that has certainly contributed. A lot of Chinese companies are opening in Mexico because it's deemed a more reliable trading partner with the U.S. than say China is right now.
Marisa, anything you wanted to bring up?
Well, Fred, you mentioned at the top of our conversation that Mexico is now our biggest trade partner. So I'm wondering also, we spend so much time focused on China and the relationship with China, but how does the fact that we're trading more with other partners kind of change the geopolitical landscape and our priorities abroad, do you think?
That's a great question also, because, one of the things I learned when I was chaired the Export-Import Bank under President Obama, and that was many said to me, the U.S. has ignored Central and Latin America, and frankly, China made large inroads into those places. So hopefully that does change that dynamic. And, we share a long border with Mexico. There are large numbers of Mexican Americans and so forth. So I would think that begins to change that dynamic, very much so. And so that has a role on geopolitics and how those relationships. I mean, just the way I also said, the fact that I think we have a different working relationship, even as poor as it may be at the moment with China, but partly trade is one thing that has kept a little bit that glue together and has created some way of, even if we de-risk, we're not going to be able to totally decouple. We had very little trade or other relations with the Soviet Union. We had Pepsi and Stolichnaya vodka. I mean, there were not a lot of in those early days, and I think that made for a more brittle relationship.
For sure.
I give you another example I discovered in my book. We don't do a lot of trade with Turkey, and as a result, it's often been a more brittle relationship. We don't have as much trade, including education, tourism, and so forth. So there's just less non-governmental interaction that would maybe keep both sides sort of on the, provide some guardrails.
Oh, that's an interesting point. I wonder if there's, I'm guessing there must be studies kind of looking deeply into that point. If you have deeper economic ties, you have more stable political ties too. That's interesting.
No,
point.
Of course,
Makes
Russia
sense.
and gas to Germany that did not provide that was not the case then, but it doesn't mean it's perfect.
Yeah.
But it does have some value.
Well, I want to end the conversation this way. We got an election coming, big one. It feels like every election, I think it's the biggest one in my lifetime, but I think this is going to be the biggest one in our lifetime. It feels like it's going to be Biden v. Trump. Let's just assume that it is for sake of conversation. What does trade policy in the world look like on the other side of the election if Biden wins re-election or Trump wins re-election? How are you thinking about that?
Well, I think that if
or are you thinking about that? Is that on the radar screen?
Say that again.
Is that on the radar screen? Is that something you've been thinking about?
Somewhat. I mean, I let me say this. I guess I haven't really wanted to think too much about President Trump re-entering the White House from a whole host of reasons, but including trade. I think that it exacerbated and made worse our relations with some of our closest allies, like Canada. To say Canada poses a national security threat to the United States is somewhat laughable, and Germany as well. So if we want to find ways to improve things with China, for example, which is certainly the largest and most important relationship we have, finding ways to do that with other countries that we are close to is the best way of doing that. If China can't pit us against France or Germany, the EU, that's a good thing. So I think President Biden has far has changed the entire dynamic of our relations with those European partners and with the developed world. one of the areas that we face a real problem, I think, is what everybody calls the global South, or developing nations. And I think the rift between the developed world and the developing world has gotten wider and wider, and COVID did not help. Immigration and migration policies were seen as part of that, in terms of how the world treated Ukrainian refugees versus refugees from, say, Africa and the Middle East. Those things are really fraught. And I don't see, if President Trump was reelected, there's no way that gets better. That only gets worse. And it gets worse at our peril, because countries like Russia and China are delighted at that rift between some of what we thought of as our natural allies and partners. And so President Biden is far better positioned to try and stitch that back together and to heal that, which would be far better for us in the long run. I mean, Africa is going to be one of the largest continents in population in our, well, maybe not my lifetime, but in our lifetime, before the mid-century. And we know what President Trump called African nations.
Yeah.
Not to be repeated, because we don't want an R rating on this podcast.
Right. Right. Well, we're gonna have to have you back, because I had a lot of other directions I wanted to go, but we just don't have time to do that. Just out of courtesy, because I kind of led the discussion in a certain direction that might be frustrating you a little bit. Is there something you wanted to say that, or focus on, that we haven't done? Just an open-ended question. Do we miss anything you want to chat about?
Yes, trade is not a four-letter word. Is a great Christmas gift and a stocking
should be on the list. Absolutely, and I concur with that. Yeah.
I will tell you what George Will did say when the book came out in 2020. George Will in the Washington Post said, "This is the one book President Biden needs to read about trade." So that was pretty good.
That's a great one. Great one. Yeah, very good. Yeah, indeed, a strong endorsement from me. So everyone should read it. And again, it's the thing I find really interesting about it is it's well written, but the history is so cool. You really learn a lot, and like the whole lots of the historical background, very important. Okay,
if you don't want to read, you could get the Audible, and you'll have to listen to my voice. That's all.
You got a mellifluous voice. Yeah, yeah. Okay, a voice for radio, voice for podcasts. Well, it was great to have you on, Fred. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Marisa. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks,
thank you,
Fred.
Mark, for inviting me. It was a lot of fun.
And Marisa, thank you for toughing it out.
I hung on.
You hung on. Yeah. Thank you for doing that. I really appreciate it. The whole Disney thing was really critical to the conversation. So really appreciate that.
Yes. Thank you for the Disney plug. It helped me jump in the conversation early.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right.
Exactly. Right. Well, with that, dear listener, we're going to call it a podcast. Talk to you next week.